Right, rolling. Hi there, and thanks for clicking on this video. So as the title suggests, I have a Pokemon game concept that I would like to pitch to the Pokemon Company. And how this concept came about is a little funny. So in the beginning of the week, I got into reading fan fiction. More specifically, I got into reading fan fiction that ChatGPT wrote. But more specifically, I got into reading fan fiction of Pokemon that ChatGPT wrote. And in this whole exploration, I somehow started writing, or rather co-writing, with ChatGPT a concept for a new Pokemon game that I think is pretty slamming. So in this game, you have two timelines, the past and the present. And this wouldn't be the first time the Pokemon Company would be exploring time travel. I mean, we have Arceus and we have legendaries like Celebi, but I still think exploring this concept would be interesting. So I was thinking about time travel because I think it would be really cool to be able to have 16 gym leaders. You can have 8 in the past and then you can have 8 in the present timeline. But what would be cool is if you have the same gym leaders, but in different time periods. So they could have different Pokemon, they could have different strategies, and they can also have different philosophies and tweaks to their personality as well. So by exploring these two different timelines, you get to explore them in different facets of their lives. Another thing that could be cool is if you have multiple generations. So maybe you fight a gym leader in the past, but what if you fight their child or their protege in the future? So there are a lot of different facets that this time travel device offers. And then I started thinking about how could this contribute narratively? So I started thinking of this plot, and it's not entirely fleshed out yet, but this is what I have so far. So in the plot, you, the protagonist, do not have parents. Hear me out. You're probably like, well, yeah, they play such a minimal role in the regular Pokemon games. And also this sounds like a typical anime shonen trope. And I agree, but again, hear me out. So in the regular Pokemon games, you usually start out in your hometown, and one of the first characters that you interact with is your mom. So in establishing that you do not have parents at the very beginning of the game, you subvert this expectation if you are a regular Pokemon player. But at the same time, you also set up the tone of this game and establish it as a little bit different from the other Pokemon games. It's a bit darker, and boy, would I love a darker themed Pokemon game. I think the last time they did that was with Colosseum and XD or whatever. And those were great games, so let's bring back darker themed Pokemon games. So a driving device in this game is that you are trying to figure out what happened to your parents. Why are they currently not in your life now? Who were they? So due to some legendary Pokemon magic, the timeline split, and you now have the opportunity to go back into the past and figure out the mystery of your parents. And in doing so, you get to meet them when they were younger and also become rivals with them and go through their trainer experience up until they became the successful Pokemon trainers that they are. So I haven't figured out whether I want them to be gym leaders or Elite Four members yet, but they're of that echelon. So in trying to figure out the mystery of your parents and also effectively communicating with them over time, you also unravel their love story as well. And boy, would I love a Pokemon game with a solid love story. So again, I don't have every single detail fleshed out, but let's get into the characters. Let's talk about your parents. So in the story, your mother is a dark type strategist trainer, and she is described as reserved, calm, calculating, but also emotionally intelligent. And she uses that emotional intelligence to understand her Pokemon, to understand her opponent, and she uses that information in her overall strategies. A big thing about her, though, is that she has the worst case of imposter syndrome. So when she was training to become the very best, people described her as not that threatening, not very strong, not very talented, but she was very creative. And she used that creativity and channeled it into her strategies. And that makes her a formidable opponent. Now, your father is your mother's rival and also direct foil. He is a fairy type chaos magician. He is described as very fun, carefree, unpredictable, and his unpredictability is also his battle strategy, which is basically no strategy. So a big thing about his character is that he was seen as a prodigy. He was seen as the very best there ever was, just right off the bat. And that caused him to feel a lot of anxiety. He felt that he always had to be high performing. He had a lot of expectations on him. People put him into molds, and his response to that is to basically rebel and shift to the other side of the spectrum and just not care. Just give two shits about any of that. And I think what that does is that it often is a defense mechanism for him. Even though he seems like he doesn't care, he actually cares deeply. Your father is actually the most sensitive and highly emotional characters in the game. And that can become his greatest strength later on, but in the beginning of his character arc, it is his greatest downfall. So sometimes his unpredictability comes from a place of not giving two shits as to what happens on the battlefield. Whatever happens, happens, just go with the flow. But sometimes that unpredictability comes from a place of high emotions, a place of utter chaos inside. And that's when he tends to lose. So what we have here is a very interesting dynamic where your mother and father basically learn from each other. They learn how to balance each other out. They learn how to let go, how to have control when it is appropriate, and basically balance chaos and order. And you are the product of exactly that, the balance of chaos and order. And that will be your greatest strength when you become the very best there ever was. And you only achieve that by understanding who your parents are in this story. So, an interesting game mechanic that I would like to have is dialogue options between you and the characters more often than maybe in the previous Pokemon games. And there is a sense that depending on what you decide or what you say in the game, it may affect what happens in the future. So perhaps depending on what you choose, you can effectively have a future with your parents. So you know how in the English franchise of the Pokemon series, the catchphrase is "gotta catch 'em all"? Well, in this game, I have a very sentimental spin-off of that. So instead of "gotta catch 'em all," the catchphrase is "I'll catch up to you." And the origin of this phrase comes from this moment where your father decides that he needs to leave the region, the village that he grew up in, for XYZ reasons, but basically to become a stronger trainer, but also to develop more understanding of himself. And I have the scene where the sun is setting and your father is basically 1 foot out of the village, and then suddenly your mother appears panting. She's been searching all over town for him. And she initially wanted to tell him to not leave. But she decides against it in that moment because she understands that it's necessary for your father to leave. And so she decides to tell him, "I'll catch up to you." And she says that because as his rival, she wants to tell him that one day she will be just as good as him, if not better. She will become the person that she admires. But at the same time, it's also a promise to him that one day she'll find him and they'll see each other again. And I have a scene at the end of this game that mirrors that. So you solve the mystery of your parents, and it's time to go back to your original timeline permanently. And before you say goodbye to your parents, the last thing they tell you is, "We'll catch up to you." And it's a promise that one day they will be together again. And so you go back to your original timeline and perhaps a bit excited because you expect to see your parents there, but it's quite the opposite. They're still not there. And you're wondering what went wrong. But the thing is, nothing went wrong. You can't change the past, but perhaps you being in the past was always part of your past. You were always meant to meet your parents back then. And what you had back then with them was the relationship that you sought in the first place anyway. And in that sense, you all were able to catch up with each other. And in that moment, in that time period, you were all together. And that's the message that I would like to leave the player, is that no connection is a missed connection necessarily. And even if things are not present in the current day, you will always have those moments in the past. And you will always have those connections. They will always be part of you. And I think that's the sort of game that I would want to see from the Pokemon Company. So that is my pitch. Pokemon Company, if you're watching this, please hit me up. Or if you are an indie game developer or you like to make ROM hacks, also hit me up. I would love to see a game like this come to life, and I would love to write a bit of that script. Anyway, if I have any more thoughts or maybe scenes or whatever that I come up with, maybe I'll share with you all online again. But until then, I hope you enjoyed my musings and my current Pokemon concept. Thank you so much for listening.